The struggles of the minorities in America against the racial exploitation and genocide dates back to 1492. This struggle manifested in agitation for peace, civil rights, and economic freedom. It continues uninterrupted till the present day. It has also been understood that the black distrust or hate the white, in the words of Claude Marquet. The blacks are very hostile to the racial propaganda of the white. The black society was hostile to the communist ideology because they consider it as a white working class movement and consider the white working class as their enemy who draw the color line against them in factories, offices, lynched and burned them for being colored. The understanding of liberational struggle and the fight against the exploitation of working class, this made the Communist Party of USA a distinct and a better organization for Claudia Jones. Around 1928, the leadership of the Comintern decided that black people in America conform to Stalin's definition of a nation. Thus, a nation is a historical, constituted, stable community of people formed on the basis of a common language, territory, economic life, and psychological makeup manifested in a common culture. The Comintern decided that black people should fight for the right of self-determination in the South. The American Communist Party thereupon began publishing maps, which indicated the exact boundaries for the projected Black Republic. The civil rights movement itself came out of the abolition struggle during the U.S. Civil War and was predominantly made up of Afro-American, as was stated by the Black Panther. The World War II saw a growth of militancy, as Claudia Jones stated in her writings. To understand this militancy correctly, to deepen and then extend the role of a Negro woman in the struggle for peace and for all interests for the working class and the Negro people means primarily to overcome the gross neglect of the special problem of Negro women. The various civil rights movements were dedicated to maintaining the government, but were determined to reform it to be tolerant of racial diversity. These goals were achieved to some extent, although racism in the government and society as a whole remained strong. In May 1954, a successful Supreme Court by the National Association for Advanced Colored People held segregation to be unconstitutional. This decision set off a mass movement of Afro-American soon after the struggle of the Hispanic, Asian, Native, and white radicals became radicalized in the peace movement. In 1951, the Civil Rights Congress, led by William Patterson, submitted a report to the United Nations stating that America is in violation of its standing orders. This stated and listed a number of cases which constituted, in the words of the American society, or in the words of the United Nations, a genocide. The Civil Rights Congress stated that the theory of hatred is no longer a private affair of Americans, but an issue for the world to contest with in general. However, this class collaborationism and revisionist approach led to an accelerated oppression of not only Negro people, but intensified oppression of the Negro woman, particularly by imperialist forces, according to Claudia Jones. In her analysis, she mentioned a developing consciousness of the woman question today, therefore must not fail to recognize that the Negro question in the United States is prior to and not equal to the woman question. That only to the extent that we fight all chauvinist expression and as regard the Negro people and fight for all the full equality of the Negro people can women as a whole advance their struggle for equal rights. In her concrete analysis, it is important to deal with the Negro question because it is a dialectical relation between the liberation of the Negro in general and the woman question, that the seed of liberating the woman is contained in the prior. The woman question has been one of the issues that was not properly addressed. In the words of Lenin, there is no good practice without Marxist theory. That is clear. In a discussion with Clara Zatkins, he said, we must create a powerful international women's movement on a clear theoretical basis. A series of women questions were discussed. The discussion ensured that many comrades shared their thoughts and writings. Claudia Jones developed her triple critical Marxist theory of women, race, and class out of this discussion with the development of Women's International Democratic Federation. For Claudia Jones, this was not transient or mere intersectionality, but a Marxist conception of dealing with a complex social identity. Claudia Jones asserted that the primary activity was not necessary for the understanding of the woman question. There should be theoretical points, and that could root itself in the understanding of race, gender, and class. In the historical analysis of the Negro woman, Claudia wrote, "History of the Negro woman shows that the Negro mother under slavery held a key position and played a dominant role in her own family groupings. This was due to primarily two factors: the condition of slavery, under which marriage as such was non-existent, and the Negro's social status was derived from the mother and not the father, and the fact that most of the Negro people brought to these shores by the slave traders came from West Africa, where the position of women based on active participation in property control was relatively higher in the family than that of the European women."
That is to say that the conjuncture in which the analysis takes place would dictate the degree to which they would find receptive responses from Negro women and of the working class to their activities and ideologies. Claudia asserted in her writing that, theoretically, ideology to which the woman question was being conceived was determined by the ideology of social formation to which it corresponds, and to the objective requirements to the dominant class in the social formation, which was the bourgeoisie philosophy. She stated that even though in 1940, 2 out of every 5 Negro women, in contrast of 2 out of every 8 white women, worked for a living, but by virtue of their majority status among the Negro people, Negro women not only constitute the largest percentage of women heads of family, but are the main breadwinners of the Negro family. She made the point that the large proportion of Negro women in the labor market is primarily a result of the low skill earning of Negro men. Thus, an amount paid to the Negro man was less to an amount that would be paid to a Negro woman for the same work. This disproportion also has its roots in the treatment and position of Negro women over the century. Negro women as workers, as Negroes, as women are the most oppressed stratum of the whole population. Claudia Jones wrote that the theory should be determined by its relationship to knowledge. Thus, the knowledge of how class leads to the disposition of people and how race and gender should not be simply considered or ignored. Instead of taking women oppressions as given, we should transform it entirely by constructing in its place a series of scientific concepts in race, class, and gender. She again made the point referring to the Women's Bureau, U.S. Department of Labor, in the Handbook of Facts for Women Workers, which showed white women workers as having median earnings more than twice as high as those of non-white workers, as more than twice as high as those of non-white women, and non-white women workers, mainly Negro women, as earning less than $500 a year. In the rural South, the earnings of women are even less. In 3 large northern industrial communities, the median income of white families is almost 60% higher than that of Negro families. The super exploitation of the Negro woman worker thus revealed the fact that not only she received as woman less the equal pay for equal work with men, but the majority of Negro women gets less than half the pay of white women. The colonial phase. Claudia Jones's deportation welcomed her to fairly a new struggle in the UK. In the US, the struggle was mainly against imperialism and the fight for black power. However, in the UK, it was against colonialism and the fight for Pan-Africanism. A report by the Executive Committee of the Communist Party of the UK in 1963 stated that the old form of the colonial question for our party developed in the period when imperialism controlled 5/6 of the world and the majority of mankind was under colonial or semi-colonial rule. This period lasted until the Second World War.
According to Claudian, discrimination is embedded in the social construction of identity politics, which includes racism and segregation, inherently connected with the question of job opportunity. Where the Negro woman is concerned, is a special oppression she faces as a Negro, as a woman, and as a worker. She is the victim of white chauvinist stereotype as to where her place should be. In the film, radio, and press, a Negro woman did not get pictured in her real role as breadwinner, mother, and protector of the family, but as a traditional mommy who puts the care of children and family of others above her own. This traditional stereotype of the Negro slave mother, which to this day appears in commercial advertisements, must be combated and rejected as a device of the imperialists to perpetuate the white chauvinist ideology that Negro women are backward, inferior, and the natural slaves of others. The creation of the Caribbean Carnival, Notting Hill, was purposely organized to address the question of dignity among the colored people. Since Claudia accepted the Marxist tenet, she understood that no person should be discriminated upon race or color. To understand the role of the West Indian Gazette in its time, one must remember that there were, for example, only about half a dozen or so black cricketers playing for the first-class counties. There was a black footballer at West Ham. There were no black newsreaders or disc jockeys on the airwaves. White passengers would bounce straight up out of their seats on buses if a black or colored passenger was bold enough to sit next to them. Some public houses still operate a color bar, covertly or otherwise. Many employers would say that they would not hire a colored person, blame the fact that they could not rent a room to a colored person because house owners blame the fact that they could not rent a room to a colored person because the white neighbors would object. This created an identity and the issue of dignity for Claudia Jones to deal with when she was in the UK. The non-employment of West Indians on the Bristol buses is not a colour bar issue at all. Quote by Sir Constantine, the British High Commissioner for Trinidad and Tobago. Claudia objected to this form of assertion and said, "We should be mindful of the fact that when colour bar issue exists, the retort is that it is economic, but such an approach could well mean the delay, postponement, or failure to expose the fight against the colour bar when clearly, in the context of British economic life and political consideration, it forms the majority of the working class discrimination." Her analysis led to the creation of a platform to correct this backwardness, not only for Negro women, but for the colored minorities as a whole. The historical account of culture by the Communist Party of UK in 1935 states, among the millions of workers who are barred from real culture activity today, there is an immense thirst for knowledge, for health, for beauty, which only socialism can satisfy. The demands of these millions for school, laboratory, clinics, new mode of travel, art, literature, and music means a new and splendid future of creative work for scientists, artists, doctors, and teachers. In France, the triumph of the People's Front has been an example to every country. The triumph was not made possible by the successful building of working class. That triumph was made possible by the successful building of working class unity. But the fight for unity was helped on, and in turn was helped by the fight on the culture front, which won over to its side great names like Langevin, Revert, Guy, and Roland. Our party was the leader in this work. we must all recognize immensely valuable allies have been won. In France, we have smashed a breach in the hold of the bourgeoisie over the minds of the people, with the result that the mass work of the party is enormously facilitated. Claudia wrote, I was deported from the USA because as a Negro woman, communist of West Indian descent, I was a thorn in the side in many opposition to Jim Crow racist discriminations against 60 million Negro Americans in the United States. In my work for redress for these grievances, for unity of Negro and white workers, for women's rights, and my general political activity, urging the American people to help by their struggle to change the present and foreign and domestic policy of the United States.
In her earlier experience of Jim Crow, racism of school life, and participation in the Scottsboro Boys trial movement in her youth, or even her experience with the young communists in CPUSA, Claudia made it clear that in the course of all Caribbean, there are two levels of discrimination. First, on the basis of identity, and on the basis of economy. Being a Caribbean person, they are marginalized in all respects. Without emancipating themselves from this marginality, they will not change their position in the society. So this struggle is a fundamental one for themselves. 2. Being a poor working class person, they are under capitalist exploitation. As a marginal community, their exploitation is deeper than other working class, so participating in class struggle is obvious for them. According to Claudia Jones, both of these two struggles are fundamental. They are not contrary, but they are complementary to each other. In her experience, Jones realized that without struggle, there is no progress. So where there is a discrimination or exploitation, there must be organized struggle to overthrow the discrimination and exploitation. But it is very difficult to sort out the proper organization and programs in a concrete condition. As a new intellectual, Claudia Jones tried to do this difficult task in her life during her stay in the US, and then in Britain as a journalist, activist, communist, and radical feminist and terrorist. As a black intellectual, Claudia Jones was able to draw the connection between the struggle for the liberation of the Negro woman and the emancipation of workers in the world. This was evident in her works when she made further analysis of emancipation of women by linking the social struggle of Negro women in different localities to those in dominant hegemony of USA. In her writings, Jones explored the deep-rooted problems of marginalized people in her society, such as Caribbean community, particularly working women of the community, in various dimensions, and link them with the concrete struggle of their emancipation and in general anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist movement. Claudia Jones understood that the nature surrounding her was not a single unit of detail for which she was unconscious of. Thus, there was the need to make language easy for everyone to understand. She was ridiculed by friends for her article, A Child ABC's Guide to Politics, which sort of linked the political relation to the environment. This gave the praxis, the discrimination and the neglect of the exploitation of workers in their social struggle identity. Class analysis and the gender categorization of women in the context of culture was to a large extent part of her class analysis.
Claudia Jones realized that Negro women, these are social cultural construction. These constructions produces some stereotypes such as Negroes are uncivilized, they are slave-minded, they are ferocious, they lack culture, they had the body but not the mind. In a nutshell, Negroes are degraded human beings. Negro women are fit for only housemaid or other household services. White supremacist culture and male chauvinist dominant society established these stereotypes as real, logical, and historical. That is why Negro people face indignity problem in every sphere of social life. Without addressing this dignity question, equal human rights, civil rights, democratic rights, the West Indian Gazette and Afro-Asian Caribbean News became the first of its kind. This newspaper became an effective tool for organizing Caribbean community and became a platform to raise demand, base movements, and realizing their own position, dignity, and unity. Claudia Jones wrote in her last published essay, The Caribbean Community in Britain, that the newspaper has served as a catalyst, quickening the awareness, social and politically, of West Indian, Afro-Asian, and their friends. Its editorial stand is for a united, independent West Indies, full economic, social and political equality and respect for human dignity for West Indian and Afro-Asian in Britain, and for peace and friendship between all Commonwealth and world of people. In fact, Jones utilized the paper as a very effective tool to organize her people to fight out against the white supremacist culture and male chauvinist dominated society.
In 1958, the UK's first widespread racial attack, the Notting Hill race riot, had occurred, in which about 108 people were charged. In response to this problematic state of race relation, Claudia called on a Caribbean carnival. In her leadership, it was held on 30th January 1959 at St. Pancras Town Hall. To organize that carnival, Claudia used the West Indian Gazette as an effective organizing tool. Jones recreated the Caribbean carnival experience for the West Indian generation of immigrants in the UK and to relieve tension after the 1958 race riot. This carnival at the same time united the various culture of Caribbean people in a platform and gave them confidence and dignity within themselves. Not only did it generate courage within the Caribbean community, it also confronted the cultural aggression of the white supremacists. After Claudia's death in 1966, the carnival still keeps going and it's organized every year in the streets of London, of the Notting Hill area, of Kingston every August, 2 days every year.
Mr. Jones, why aren't West Indians applying to come to this country in any numbers?
Well, I would say that the Commonwealth Immigrants Act has acted as a deterrent against their coming. And in fact, that was the intention of the Act, which many of us considered a colour bar bill.
Now, there was a good deal of ill feeling about this Act when it was introduced. Has that ill feeling among West Indians died down?
What is important to recognise now, it's not so much they're feeling directed against the Act as such, because they're responsible, the Act is law, they're fighting to repeal it, but the consequences of the Act, namely the fact that the population at large, because of the whole propaganda against the West Indians, regard them as second-class citizens, and they themselves, on the job in virtually every sphere of life, find this difficulty since the Immigration Act in terms of discrimination, colour bar housing, etc., etc.
I've heard that you've got rooms going, and
I haven't got a room, but I'm afraid I can't let you in.
Beg your pardon?
I can't let you in. I've got 14 English boys in here.
14 English boys. So you don't want to...
I can't mix. I'm ever so sorry, I would myself, but if I let you come in, all my boys would leave.
If you let me come
If
in...
I let you come in, all the other ones would go.
Claudia Jones, born in Trinidad, lived in the United States and died in the United Kingdom, is buried at the left of Karl Marx. She is a thinker who has been able to differentiate between gender, race, and class. Thank you. This work was compiled by Satarupa, Loretta, Angela, Marisa, Islam and Frank.